Good morning, welcome. I'm Andrew Lansley, I'm Chair of the Cambridgeshire Development Forum, and I want first just to say a very big welcome to all of you and thank you for being with us on this bright and beautiful morning here in Cambridge to talk about the issues relating to the availability of space for employment purposes in and around the Cambridge region. Cambridgeshire Development Forum is a bringing together of those who are concerned with the delivery of development. We don't regard ourselves as a planning organisation. We saw ourselves as complementary to those whose job it is to make the plans in Cambridgeshire and the region. We focus on the question of how we deliver on that, but it has drawn us into understanding some of those constraints on delivery. The question of land use and spatial strategy and planning is absolutely central to the development of a location. And I remember, of course, I go back to the structure plan of 2006 and the decisions that we made in the structure plan. And if we had not made those decisions, today we would not have the biomedical campus that we do. We wouldn't have AstraZeneca's headquarters here. We would not have the Eddington development on the west of Cambridge. There's so many of those. We wouldn't have Northstowe, although... Anyway, we wouldn't have Northstowe. And what we need new settlements. That was what we decided. We decided we were going to actually reshape the development in Cambridge, and we were going to reshape the development outside it. I have to say, at the time, I can remember that I was pushing for what was called a market town strategy. And do you know what? I think we still need a market town strategy in addition to what was decided back then. But that's purely my personal view. But what I want to say today is what's become increasingly obvious is that with the government's interest, and you listen sometimes to government, I even listen to government, and they're talking about the availability of lab space in Cambridge. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, this is true, but it is an insufficient analysis. If you are involved in life sciences, yes, you need lab space, but you also need, as indeed AstraZeneca have done, you need space for all of your other services and requirements. You need all the services around technology. And you need sometimes manufacturing and production facilities as well, often on a small scale locally, but actually they can be very important as part of that the development in research and development. But also what has become increasingly obvious to me is that, and to us I think on the Cambridgeshire Development Forum, is that there are other wider issues that we really need to address. One of them, of course, is the change in logistics, which you'll hear much more expert opinion about from our contributors today. And that is changing the shape of how we do distribution and logistics across the country, indeed across the globe. Secondly, life sciences is not the only story in Cambridge. There are many other technology stories to be told around Cambridge, and what that tells you is clusters and the importance of clusters, and Cambridge has many such clusters, not just life sciences, in agri-tech, in engineering, in information technologies and so on. And we need to be able to accommodate all of those, and we need to bring them here. And then the third thing is, if you are going to do that, what was obvious to me back in 2006, and I think is still true today, is that you need to work on a regional basis. I don't mean, all the way, down from the Thames to the Wash necessarily, but certainly beyond Cambridge. And valuable and important has been the shared planning that the City and South Cambridgeshire are doing together. But frankly, with the combined authority and beyond the combined authority in parts of Bedfordshire, parts of Norfolk, parts of Suffolk, Hertfordshire, we need to be able to work together across a broader geography. And one of my messages to government has been the Cambridge Delivery Group, who we're all kind of thinking, well, how is this going to help us to do? Well, the one thing is we can't sit around and wait for them to tell us what to do. We have to say to the Cambridge Delivery Group, this is what we need. And actually, if government can do anything, it should enable us to work on that wider geography in order to be able to meet the wider needs that we have. And from my point of view, that includes availability of space for employment and indeed for manufacturing. If we are going to be long-term the place where we add value, it is not going to be solely in research and development. It's going to be in the manufacturing, particularly the advanced manufacturing, that comes with that research and development activity. And there is absolutely no reason why that cannot be based here in this region and not necessarily go off as it did in the past in, as I knew, in pharmaceuticals to Ireland or to Singapore or to China and India. It can be here because increasingly life sciences is leading to specialised manufacturing, and the proximity of the manufacturing activity to the research and development activity can be a central issue. So that's just me setting the scene. I hope when we conclude, one of the things that we will conclude is that we should be working on a land use and spatial strategy that does have that greater breadth to it, not simply confined to what happens in Cambridge and immediately adjacent to Cambridge. But now you've heard enough from me. Now you want to hear from people who really know what they're talking about. So I'm going to start with Rory Brooke, Head of Economics at Savills. Rory, over to you. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. I'm grateful to all our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm first going to set the scene in terms of what's happening to industry and logistics at a national, regional, local level, and then I'll follow up after Ben to talk about how the implications of that for forecasting the need for industrial land in the Greater Cambridgeshire area. So the starting point, obviously, historically, well, when I say historically, for the last sort of 40, 50 years, there's been a long period of deindustrialisation, of industrial decline. And I think there's been a slow process of actually realising that's come to an end, and there's now a need to look at industrial growth. And so I'm going to start off by setting the scene with some information on that. So this graph here shows the national supply and availability rate of industrial land. And so you can see that generally there's, in the early 2000s, there's been, early 2010s, there's been a fairly good supply, and then that availability has dropped. And you can see the key thing to bear in mind is that it's the general view is that a market equilibrium, you'll have around about 8% availability. So you need to have a certain amount of space in the market available for it to work efficiently. And so generally speaking, anything that's below 8% is a sign that the market is supply constrained, that there's not enough availability of space, a need to allocate and bring more land forward. And so you can see there's a national level, since around 2014, there's been less than 8% availability of space. So it's a national issue around the availability of industrial land. More specifically, you can see that particularly following the COVID pandemic, there's been an upsurge in new development, and that has grown significantly, which again is a signal that there's a growing need and demand. That's dropped off a little bit with the challenges that we've been facing at the moment, but there's no reason, and I'll come on to this, to think that there's not a fundamental long-term change in the situation. You can also see that in terms of take-up, so again, significant growth, and that's dropped off a little bit, but as I say again, strong indications that that's going to carry on. If you look at it, another market indicator to look at the strength of the market and whether the market is supply constrained is the rental levels. And so what you've got here is the yellow line is showing national average rents, and the dark blue line is showing consumer price inflation. And so what you can see is that rentals have been growing faster than inflation for the last few years, which again is a signal that the markets are constrained. What's the reasons behind the strength of the industry and logistics sector? Well, there's various factors that are driving it. So one is the growth in internet shopping. As we're all aware, that's been growing steadily over the last couple of decades, and the forecasts expect that will carry on growing. Here it's shown going up to 35% of sales by 2027. So that all has implications for the amount of industry and logistics space that is needed. There's also more extensive supply chains and other growth drivers that mean companies, as Andrew was just mentioning, companies, even if it's sort of high-tech companies and so on, they still need extensive supply chains, and that's been evolving and increasing requirements for space. There's also increased freight flows, so growth in all forms of transport, which again feeds through to a need for more industry and logistics space. And there's with the post-Brexit world, there's reshoring and nearshoring, so a number of companies, many companies now are reviewing their strategy on where space is provided and replanning with a greater emphasis on space for the UK market. So that's the national picture, and then it's very much a similar picture at the East of England and Greater Cambridgeshire level. So here you can see the fall in availability rates, again well below the 8% for the last few years for the East of England. Again, you can see that the rentals in the East of England have been increasing faster than inflation. And then if you look at Greater Cambridge, you can see that the availability in Greater Cambridge has been below the market equilibrium. Again, that inflation in rentals has been stronger than the inflation rate. And then also, specifically in terms of the types of space, Greater Cambridge has much less larger space than the theme of the functional economic market area, which covers the wider area, including Peterborough and Huntingdonshire. And also, Greater Cambridge has less good quality industrial space. So you can see that the 4 or 5-star is an indication of good quality industrial space. You can see that it doesn't even register on the graph here. So I'm going to hand over now to Ben, who's going to go through some more of the detail in the local context.
My focus this morning is mainly on the Cambridge-centric markets, so looking at, say, 20-mile radius from the centre of Cambridge, focusing on buildings of 25,000 square foot and above, looking at the existing availability that is under construction and proposed, then looking at quickly at demand and supply markets as well. So in terms of existing accommodation, the majority of existing industrial accommodation is predominantly based on the east of Cambridge. Examples also stretching out to the likes of Camborne and Ely. Looking at, just as a quick overview, the existing accommodation, which is available and occupied, there's circa 40 million square foot, which is existing, available and occupied. However, the bulk of this accommodation is dominated by the sub 10,000 square foot brackets and falling quite quickly thereafter. So in terms of existing accommodation that is available, there's just over 3.4 million square foot, split over 120 properties within the 20-mile radius of Cambridge, which is existing and available. However, looking at it from a 25,000 square foot in addition and above, there's only 16 properties currently available, offering 1.4 million square feet. And you can see on the image on the right-hand side, the majority of this is on the outskirts of this 20-mile radius. One important point is also looking at the age of the construction. Most of the properties are averagely dated about 1987, so only 8% of the accommodation within this 20-mile radius has been built since 2018. Again, looking at the available square foot, this has, as Rory has been saying, declined significantly, circa 3.6 million square foot back in 2013, falling to just under 2.5 million square foot at today's date. This is also replicated in terms of the availability rate, which is the percentage of the existing available stock, falling from 12% down to just below 6% at the moment. So in terms of new build deliveries, based on year by year, there has, as Roy said, been a significant increase over 2020 to 2022, but a remarkable drop this year and forecast for next year, falling below the the average over the last 10 years, which is 700,000 square foot. There have been peaks in 2020, 2022, so 4 million square foot, but it is significantly dropping below that. Regarding proposed accommodation, there's around 3.3 million square foot within the 20-mile radius. The majority is, again, located on the periphery, significantly around Symmetry Park at Biggleswade and Bells Park as well, with a handful of other more local examples cropping up. These include Bourne Quarter, Cambridge Research Park, Marston Road in Huntingdon, and again, Symmetry Park in Biggleswade, where the majority of this accommodation is being proposed. There are a few schemes coming forward, so Ely Gateway, for instance, is in planning consent at the moment, and that has potential to deliver 194,000 square foot, but subject to planning. In terms of demands, leasing activity remains very strong across the region, but there is a noticeable constraint in supply, which is impacting on take-up, as can be seen in the drop in 2023 figures to date. In terms of the months in the markets, this is a representation of demand. Again, a significant fall in the amount of time that space is staying on the market, dropping from about 22 months back in 2015 to just over 6 months at the moment. And demands and take-up over the last 5 years, so across the image on the left-hand side is looking at leasing activity across all transactions. So this is from 1 square foot and above, whereas focusing on the larger take-up, 25,000 square foot and above, the largest transactions circled in red, again circled on the periphery of this 20-mile radius in fairly the obvious locations, Ely, Cambourne, Huntingdon, Royston, etc. And here's a quick overview of some of the deals that have happened, the more significant ones in the last 5 years. So space being taken up at new markets, Haverhill, Royston, for example, pushing this with the location of where this space has been taken up, principally by the lack of available significant size space within the immediate Cambridge area. And this is resulting in a fairly sizable uptake in rents, so jumping from £5.20 back in 2013 to £10.38. And this is an average rent across the existing as well as new build accommodation. So where does this leave us? So the site's only 3% of existing accommodation in and around Cambridge is within that sort of mid-box size, so circa 25,000 square foot or larger. There's no existing available buildings of that scale in Cambridge. Most of the existing accommodation is dated, so averaging 36 years old, and doesn't currently meet modern industrial standards. There's limited new accommodation with only 8% of existing space that's less than 5 years old and falling availability rates. And in terms of demand, there is higher than average take-up levels throughout 2022 to 2020 to 22, with take-up in 23 constrained by supply shortages, which has been reflected in that the lettings within the last 6 months. And what is coming where? So there is a drop in construction rates in 2023, but there is some proposed accommodation which is generally focused on the outskirts of Cambridge, and ultimately it's where it's needed, is where these new settlements are being created. So the likes of Cambourne and Waterbeach, for example, as well as Melbourne and Sawston. But there is also a lack of land that is available on a freehold basis, which is often sought by occupiers who are looking at making significant investments into their properties. So what's going to happen? In terms of supply constraints, there is a spreading need for this. So it's spreading to Cambourne, Ely, Huntingdon, Haverhill, exactly where the locations are being provided, which ultimately is going to be causing commuting issues coming back into Cambridge. There is limited supply, which is pushing up the rents. And finally, the lack of accommodation does result in constraints around existing business growth, not just for existing Cambridge businesses, but also those that are looking to come into the Cambridge markets.
It's clear that the industrial logistics market in the Cambridgeshire area is supply constrained. And so what I'm going to talk about now is the implications of that for forecasting the future need for industrial land and how much land is allocated. And so just going to recap on where Cambridge City and South Cambs have got in their policies on industrial land. So the context has been two parts of the context. One, as I said before, going further back in time, that there's been industrial decline, and so there you've had a demand constrained rather than supply constrained market, and generally there's been very little land allocated for industry in the Cambridgeshire area. Now, and that then feeds through to the current planning policies that generally don't allocate much land for industry. And to look at the evidence base behind this. Now, one of the key things I want to emphasise in this part of the presentation is that different ways of forecasting industrial land demand. There's some that look at employment forecasts and then translate that into space. There's some that look at historic take-up rates and then translate that into space. There's some that sort of take a sort of synergy of both of those factors. But the key thing to bear in mind that in the recent past, that's in the context of a supply-constrained market. And so what that means is if you look at the historic data, whether it's employment or land, you're not necessarily capturing all of the demand. There's a certain amount of suppressed demand that's not expressed in the historic figures and then is not factored into the forecast, because the forecasts start with the historic figures. And so you can see this in the work back in 2019 that was done for the councils by GL Hearn, where they were in fact forecasting a decline in the need for industrial space, which clearly just doesn't match with all the market signals that Ben and I have just been talking about. The councils have carried out more recent work, ICNE's study from 2022, which is shown in the bottom table there. And so there they're showing, sorry, the titles have been lost on the slides you're seeing here, but the 56,935 is the existing supply on their assessment. That's square metres, so about 500,000 square feet. The 200,000 square metres, around 2 million square feet, is their forecast of demand over the planned period. And so they're saying that there's a net need of new industrial space of about 1.5 million square feet. So that method doesn't take explicit account of suppressed demand, and so we all the work we've been doing, and this is fed through to advice we've been giving to the BPF and that have been discussions with national government, is emphasising that there's a need to refresh the way that industrial land is forecast and to take more explicit account of an estimate for suppressed demand. And so this is just re-emphasised here in the points that there's the market signals there that show that the rents are increasing higher than inflation and that the availability rate is below the 8%. Another indicator of that lack of supply is if you look at the total amount of industrial and logistics space per dwelling as a benchmark. And I think maybe one way to think about industrial and logistics space, particularly in the sort of post sort of the world that we're currently in, is for the UK, is that quite a significant amount of industry is about a support function to the rest of the economy. And so the consequence of that is as the rest of the economy grows, both in population and activity, there's a consequent increased requirement for industrial space. And so you can see here that on average there's about 11.2 square metres per dwelling at the level of England, similar figure 10.5 for east of England, but Greater Cambridge is quite significantly less than that, 7.7 square metres per dwelling. And so if you work out what that means for the population, 130,000 people in Greater Cambridgeshire, that equates to 450,000 square metres of extra industrial and logistics space that's needed for the existing population, so about 4.5 million square feet. And then if you account for the projected future population, then there's another 580,000 square feet, nearly 6 million square feet of space required. So I'm using that as an illustration. I'm not saying that's our forecast. I'd like to emphasise what I'm saying is that we need to take account of these factors more explicitly in coming up with forecasts. And there's good reasons in my view, to come to the conclusion that probably the council's forecasts of the need for industrial space are less than it would be if you took account of suppressed demand. So to recap, there's strong industrial and logistics markets at national, regional, local level, lack of good quality and larger stock at the local level. The Greater Cambridgeshire authorities have been preparing the local plans, but so far they haven't taken full account of that suppressed demand that I've been talking about. Obviously there's policy decisions here, and that's maybe what we'll come on to discuss in terms of the degrees to which you want to accommodate it and where you want to accommodate it and what the consequences are. But as a starting point, I think it's important to recognise that there is a significant amount of suppressed demand that could could be, if it was accommodated, then there'd be all the growth and benefits that would flow from that.
You know, why is there a shortage? What happens if there is a shortage? What is the planning system doing to provide more land, and what could it mean for this region? And I'll touch on the same sort of geographic area, because this is where people look. If people are looking, and we've got some occupiers in the room, they'll generally look in these sorts of areas within 20 miles of Cambridge on the whole. Obviously we're pleased to have combined authority representatives here. This is very much part of this region. So we've heard about the demand. Where is it coming from? A lot of the new technologies, particularly, as Andrew said, advanced manufacturing. We've heard about PA technology based in Melbourne, moving to Royston, Cambridge Design Partnership taking space in Bourne, defence sector, CRFS with Alconbury. And then you've got some of the medical companies, Coloplast, medical devices, spinning out of Cambridge, as Andrew's alluded to. Of course, some big manufacturing companies like Encocam going to Huntingdon. So those are the sort of new sectors. It's a familiar story. The demand for last mile logistics has changed because of the e-commerce habits we talked about. DHL are taking space in Huntingdon, and we've seen Johnson's Removals go to taking a new unit at Bar Hill. These are companies who need to service Cambridge, and we need these sorts of businesses. But those companies are facing competition. I mean, Cowley Road, exciting new development of the Cambridge North East development, is displacing a lot of industrial companies, whether it's the Veolias or the bus station or whatever. We've seen a lot of residential development take up industrial estates, Clifton Road, the Paddocks, for instance, and that is all recognised. We need housing as well. Competition, we've had quite a lot of competition from the lab sector, so those sites with sort of obvious potential for extensive uses, interestingly, Coldham's Lane is allocated for extensive industrial uses, is likely to go to laboratories. This scheme at South Cambridge on Dales Manor is already being built for labs, and there's a great success of the Unity campus taking industrial land to go into labs. And we need labs. We need, that's the engine of growth for Cambridge. But we need both, as been said. We need industrial and logistics space as well as residential and laboratories. So we've talked a little bit about this onshoring thing, and this is perhaps for discussion later. We've come across very large companies who want to be basing themselves in this region. They're in Europe at the moment. Their supply chains, whether they're in e-commerce or manufacturing, are in Europe, but they're finding Brexit difficulties. They need to come and have a base in this area. And of course, Cambridge, Huntingdon is a very good area with close proximity to the East Coast ports, good labour, good skill set. And we're seeing a lot of these larger companies come here. They're not just coming here because of the location. They're coming here because it's well connected. And we've just done a report with ARU with one particular company looking at the CO2 savings. Something like 70% of that international company's CO2 savings could be achieved by its trucks coming to this region if it were allowed. So what's the impact? As Ben has said, the rents have doubled in 10 years. Bidwell's have predicted the rents will continue to rise in their latest data book, which is very interesting to read if you haven't read it. And so that's making the man in the street, it's costing more for their industrial accommodation. So what is the planning system doing to deal with this? Well, it's not really focused on employment land. Local authorities have a 5-year housing land supply, and there's a lot talked about that for housing, but there's no similar strategy for the supply of employment land. The only requirement is to meet enough need over the local plan period. And as we've heard, that need is based on the previous local plan. And if there's not enough supply, the method will show an artificially low figure, as we've heard. And this whole suppressed demand discussion is really important. And as you've heard, British Property Federation are lobbying government, and they do not reflect the need from industry and retail operations, the new technologies that are asking for their space. It looks at the past take-up being projected forward, and therefore in a restrictive policy environment, simply that isn't the right way to do it. And we're pleased that Cambridge, Greater Cambridge have taken up the gauntlet and have increased their predictions since 2019 to the early report this year. But by their own admission, there is still a 1.5 million square foot shortfall if you use if you use a suppressed demand model, it will be even higher. And indeed, the last predictions we looked at were something between 6 million, 10 million square feet of industrial space was required over the next plan period, which goes up to 2041. So my plea to those considering the next local plans from councils, other parties, should be looking at making suppressed demand part of their analysis. So what can local authorities and authorities do? We're very pleased to have many councillors here today, representatives of local authorities, officers, combined authority. 4 things. Firstly, let's structure a more flexible approach to delivering employment land, which looks at the shortfall. Let's lobby government to remove these local plan caps on employment land, look at this a bit more regionally, as Andrew suggests, give further consideration to those occupiers who can make a special case to say, look, let's get this planning application through, and lots of other local authorities are doing it. We've been in Oxfordshire, Siemens and others have done these bold moves and taken schemes through out width of the plan process. And we, as Cambridgeshire Development Forum and members of it, would like to work with all the stakeholders in the room to see how we can deliver this, and it's really good that we're having this workshop today. So, have I covered everything I said I would? Why is there a shortage? What are the companies? It's mainly to do, and we'll hear a little bit later from some of the advanced manufacturing companies on the panel, the demand from these new technologies has driven demand, and we've heard about last mile logistics. What is the current planning system doing? It's probably not doing enough at the moment. We need to look at that suppressed demand analysis and other methods to assess that. So who's importantly losing out? Well, occupiers are moving to the satellite towns. We've heard about PA technology currently in Melbourne having to move to one of their operations to Royston, and we can debate whether that's a good thing. There's obviously much more commuting as those companies have to travel, or their workers have to travel further. So let's look at places, as Ben mentioned, like Camborne, and locating new industrial estates near the new settlements where we're encouraging people to live. And of course, Cambridgeshire authorities have an opportunity now to engage with the property sector at the next local plan, so to deal with that miscalculation. And on a slightly interesting note, I was doing some analysis, and 60 years ago this year is the 60th anniversary of the first woman on the moon. Probably first woman in space. And it's very interesting as we talk about Space Race today to say how lucky we are to have so many lady councillors in the room. So when we're next gazing down at the next local plans, councillors, think of the Space Race Seminar and those conclusions.